Did Donald Trump actually build his own empire, or has a massive illusion finally shattered? We are looking at $500 million in hidden offshore money, a physical raid on the Trump organization, and a federal judge demanding answers. Good morning, everyone, and there is a massive wave of breaking news to unpack today. Tax investigators in New York State are currently diving deep into an explosive report that threatens to dismantle 40 years of carefully curated self-promotion by President Trump. A comprehensive investigation by the New York Times suggests that he actually received the equivalent of at least $413 million from his father's expansive real estate empire, largely facilitated through questionable tax avoidance strategies. For decades, Mr. Lode, Trump has presented himself to the world as the ultimate self-made billionaire, a narrative that formed the absolute bedrock of his 2016 presidential campaign. He famously claimed that he started with a very small loan from his father, which he then built into a colossal empire before paying every single penny back. However, the Times report explicitly labels some of these financial maneuvers as outright fraud, though the president's legal team vehemently denies any such fraud or tax evasion ever took place. Paula Reed, reporting from the White House, emphasized just how enormous this story is. The Times meticulously reviewed over 100,000 pages of confidential financial documents, concluding that throughout every single phase of his life, his finances were deeply intertwined with and dependent upon his father's incredible wealth. This is Daniel Cave, and I want to thank you for tuning in right as this incredible story breaks. What is unfolding right now has genuinely shocked political observers and financial experts alike. A federal judge has officially ordered Trump to appear in a court of law to address shocking findings uncovered by IRS auditors, evolving into one of the most significant and consequential financial investigations in modern American political history. We are talking about allegations of systematic tax fraud that are not based on mere political mudslinging or partisan gripes, but rather on cold, hard bank records and precise forensic accounting that simply follows the money trail. The man who has historically demanded absolute total loyalty from everyone around him and projected an aura of financial genius and untouchable strength may have finally encountered an adversary he cannot intimidate: the Internal Revenue Service. The IRS does not care about public personas, political clout, or the size of a social media following. They only care about the numbers. These auditors, sifting through mountains of financial records originally brought to light by a catastrophic civil fraud judgment against Trump in New York, have flagged massive discrepancies. These anomalies go way beyond even the most aggressive tax planning or creative accounting. This is not a simple dispute over interpretation, methodology, depreciation schedules, or how to categorize certain deductions. The raw numbers paint a picture that no carefully crafted press release or Truth Social post can possibly obscure. Now, a federal judge demands that this story be laid bare in an open courtroom, with Trump physically present to answer for it. Stick around for a full breakdown of this explosive situation, and please remember to subscribe so we can reach our goal of 100,000 subscribers. Going back to that initial narrative, the president has long maintained that $1 million loan jump-started his business journey. Yet, the Times discovered that he actually received at least $60 million in various loans from his father, funds that were reportedly never fully repaid. A massive portion of his fortune was allegedly amassed by engaging in what the publication describes as deeply dubious tax schemes. For instance, Mr. Trump and his siblings reportedly established a sham corporation specifically designed to disguise millions in financial gifts from their parents. Furthermore, they allegedly assisted their father in taking improper tax deductions and formulated deliberate strategies to drastically undervalue their parents' vast real estate holdings. Altogether, the Times estimates that these complex maneuvers allowed the Trump family to dodge at least $550 million in standard gift and inheritance taxes, instead paying a mere fraction of that amount, totaling just over $50 million. An attorney for the president fired back, labeling these allegations of fraud and evasion as 100% false and highly defamatory. Concurrently, the White House released an unusual statement that briefly dismissed the article as a misleading attack before pivoting to list the president's accomplishments and take shots at the newspaper. But the scope of the investigation widens significantly when we look at the reported discovery of unreported income from foreign entities, which totals over $500 million. Let that staggering figure settle in your mind completely before moving forward. We are talking about $500 million flowing into Trump's financial orbit from overseas sources. This is money that legally should have been declared on federal tax returns filed with the government. It is income that should have been taxed at standard rates applicable to every other hardworking American who earns an income, regardless of how powerful or well-connected they happen to be. Instead, this massive sum was allegedly concealed within a complex labyrinth of offshore trusts and anonymous shell companies, structures engineered with the singular goal of keeping the funds entirely invisible to the government. This is far from a simple accounting error caught during a routine review, nor is it a misunderstanding of a convoluted tax code that reasonable professionals might interpret differently. This goes entirely beyond the aggressive but legal tax avoidance strategies that wealthy individuals routinely employ alongside sophisticated advisors. According to the staggering forensic accounting findings that triggered this court appearance, this represents a highly deliberate, systematically executed, and calculated effort to conceal income from the United States Treasury. This is revenue that every honest citizen, from factory workers to small business owners to nurses working double shifts, is legally required to report and pay taxes on without exception. The forensic evidence does not deal in impressions or political opinions. It deals strictly in transactions, wire transfers, and bank records detailing money moving from point A to point B through structures engineered specifically to obscure that movement from federal auditors. Because of this, a federal judge has ruled that these specific records deserve a full accounting in an open court. President Trump is facing intense new scrutiny over his finances. The New York State Department of Taxation and Finance states it is vigorously pursuing all appropriate avenues of investigation following massive allegations that he utilized legally dubious tax schemes in the 1990s to exponentially increase his inherited fortune. The intricate details are outlined in the in-depth New York Times report, which is based on 100,000 pages of financial documents, including highly confidential tax returns belonging to Trump's father and his associated companies. It is important to note that NBC News has not yet independently confirmed the allegations in this report. The Times specifically noted that much of the money flowed to Trump because he aided his parents in dodging taxes in the 90s, setting up a sham corporation with his siblings to disguise millions in gifts. Records and interviews indicate that Trump also aided his father in taking improper tax deductions worth millions of dollars more. The core trigger that launched this massive auditing avalanche perfectly illustrates how rapidly his legal disasters are piling on top of one another. The enormous civil fraud judgment out of New York, the one that found him personally liable for systematically and deliberately inflating the value of his properties to secure favorable loans and insurance rates, came with a staggering penalty of nearly $500 million. The exact moment that judgment landed, it sent absolute shockwaves rippling across the entire financial world, leaving onlookers stunned by the sheer scale of the deception. A New York civil judge conclusively ruled that Donald Trump had lied about his asset values, exaggerating his net worth by over $2 billion by wildly misrepresenting the true value of his hotels, golf clubs, and buildings. He even vastly overstated the square footage and value of his own personal New York apartment, with a civil trial related to Trump Organization fraud looming next week, bringing the potential of a $250 million fine completely separate from his 4 ongoing criminal cases. Investigators from various agencies saw an open door and walked straight through. The pivotal question they started asking was simple, direct, and absolutely devastating. If he was committing rampant fraud in his business dealings, was he also committing fraud on his taxes? As IRS auditors began pulling on those specific threads, a massive tapestry of deception unraveled, one so deep and deliberately constructed that it spanned multiple years and crossed international borders. The offshore trusts they discovered were not innocent. Passive holding structures established for legitimate business purposes. They were meticulously crafted vehicles meant to hide income, exploit reporting gaps, and utilize foreign jurisdictions where banking secrecy laws made detection incredibly difficult. Trump's sprawling network of shell companies operated exactly like a parallel financial universe, allowing money to move around freely without triggering mandatory reporting obligations that would alert tax authorities. Then there is the issue of vastly inflated deductions, representing another enormous pillar of this alleged fraud. According to public findings, Trump claimed huge write-offs for charitable contributions that were wildly overstated, framed personal indulgences as legitimate business expenses, and took deductions for items that simply do not qualify under any interpretation of the tax law. IRS auditors meticulously went through these deductions line by line, comparing his claims against actual tax law, and uncovered a deliberate, systematic pattern of exaggeration designed to avoid millions upon millions in properly owed taxes. This was not a matter of pushing the envelope or taking aggressive positions subject to legitimate debate. Investigators see it as pure, documented, deliberate fabrication. Tax prosecutors specifically refer to these kinds of actions as distinct badges of fraud because they indicate a conscious, intentional effort to deceive the government. Trump's reaction to all this was as predictable as it was completely ineffective. His social media feed instantly erupted with his familiar vocabulary of persecution, deep state conspiracies, and witch hunts. He is loudly claiming that the IRS audit is entirely politically motivated, that the timing is highly suspicious, and that the whole thing is just an establishment attempt to bring down a powerful president. However, the Internal Revenue Service does not operate on political timelines. The career auditors leading this investigation are not political appointees who can be easily pressured or redirected by the White House. They are forensic accountants and specialized tax professionals who spend their entire lives applying the tax code impartially, regardless of the political affiliation or identity of the person being examined. They follow the numbers wherever they lead. In this specific instance, those numbers pointed straight to a multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme backed by a clear, documented paper trail pointing directly at Trump. Prying political persecution is a rhetorical shield he has utilized his entire career to convince supporters that accountability is just unfair targeting in disguise. But the evidence here is not a matter of political interpretation or opinion. It is grounded in bank statements, wire transfers, and accounting entries that cannot be explained away by screaming on social media, regardless of how frequently or loudly he screams. And then came the raid. That is when the entire situation shifted to a vastly more serious level. The escalation of this investigation into a physical raid on Trump Organization offices marks a terrifying turning point for everyone in his orbit. Federal agents do not lightly execute search warrants on the business headquarters of a sitting president. Sending IRS criminal investigators into those offices to physically seize hard drives, documents, and computers required multiple, stringent levels of approval within both the IRS and the Department of Justice. It meant demonstrating undeniable probable cause to a federal magistrate that evidence of actual crimes would be found at that exact location. This was not a broad fishing expedition hoping to catch something useful. It was a highly targeted, precise tactical operation fueled by evidence already gathered during the audit, proving beyond a doubt that this has moved into a full-scale criminal inquiry. Agents entered the building seeking evidence of federal tax evasion, a felony carrying a prison sentence of up to 5 years per individual count, and they walked out with boxes of critical data, internal correspondence between Trump and his accountants, and ledgers that prosecutors will utilize to build a case that could end with him sitting in a federal prison cell. Now, a court order has been issued compelling him to appear personally before a judge, bringing his ultimate nightmare scenario to life. A subpoena demands the production of his tax returns spanning multiple years, the exact same documents he fought so desperately, aggressively, and persistently to keep hidden during his campaigns and throughout his presidency. Being ordered to sit at a defendant's table and answer questions under oath about financial maneuvers flagged as fraudulent by the IRS is the precise scenario he spent years engineering endless legal battles to prevent. It is happening anyway. He constructed his entire public identity on the absolute myth of his business genius, claiming to be a uniquely successful, self-made billionaire perfectly suited to lead the country. Now, he is being dragged into a sterile courtroom to explain why he allegedly hid $500 million in income, created evasive offshore trusts, and continuously inflated deductions to reduce his tax bill year after year. In a federal courtroom, there are no television cameras to perform for and no rally crowds to cheer his defiance and drown out the uncomfortable details. There is only a judge, a prosecutor, and a record of unyielding evidence that leaves absolutely no room for bluster or deflection. Trump has absolutely no idea how to function in that kind of environment. The political fallout is spreading through Washington like a contagion, reaching people who previously stood firmly by his side. House Democrats, already building impeachment articles on multiple grounds, like abuse of power and obstruction, are now directly incorporating this tax evasion evidence to vastly strengthen their overall case. They are preparing high-profile public hearings where IRS officials will testify about exactly what they found, and the documents showing offshore trusts and unreported income will be explicitly displayed for the American people to see with their own eyes. The political messaging will be devastatingly simple and lethal. While everyday Americans worked overtime to pay their mortgages, struggled to make quarterly estimated payments, and saved up all year for their tax bills, Donald Trump was allegedly hiding $500 million in offshore accounts to avoid paying anything at all. That message does not require a political science degree to understand, nor does it require partisan affiliation to feel the anger it produces. It triggers a visceral, gut-level reaction that transcends party lines, and Democrats know it. Terrified Republicans on Capitol Hill are watching this unfold with mounting horror and are actively doing the math. They understand that tax evasion is exceptionally politically toxic with ordinary voters. Americans might fiercely debate foreign policy, social issues, and the proper role of government, but they are universally united in their absolute contempt for people who cheat on their taxes. Every single voter who has written a check to the IRS, every small business owner, and every family will look at someone hiding $500 million and feel an outrage that no amount of political spin can neutralize. Republican members in highly competitive districts are currently calculating whether defending a documented tax cheat is more dangerous to their re-election prospects than facing a primary challenge from the base. Because while the base is undeniably loud and energetic, swing voters ultimately decide general elections, and swing voters notoriously do not forgive tax evasion. Simultaneously, the wealthy donor class is beginning to recoil in ways that will have catastrophic financial consequences for his political operation. Wealthy contributors recognize that tax evasion is politically radioactive. Even individuals who utilize aggressive tax avoidance themselves know that being publicly linked to someone caught committing documented outright fraud is disastrous for their own reputations. Consequently, fundraisers will become sparser, donation checks will become smaller, and the elite bundlers who package massive contributions will find their networks rapidly losing enthusiasm. A political apparatus that relies entirely on a constant, massive infusion of cash simply cannot survive that drying up. The evidence the IRS has meticulously assembled is described by legal experts as a prosecutor's absolute dream case. Piece by devastating piece, it is becoming public. We are seeing bank records tracing foreign money into offshore accounts, internal emails between Trump and his accountants explicitly discussing how to structure transactions to bypass reporting requirements, tax returns filled with fabricated deductions, and ledgers from Westchester accounts structured entirely to hide assets from tax authorities. Trump cannot feign ignorance and claim he was unaware of what his accountants were doing because the written correspondence proves he was personally and directly involved in the decisions. He cannot defend the deductions as legitimate because auditors have applied the actual tax code and found them fabricated, nor can he claim the offshore trusts were standard business practices when the transaction patterns prove they existed exclusively to conceal income. The sheer humiliation of the upcoming court appearance cannot be underestimated as a massive factor in his accelerating political decline. Here is a man whose entire psychological makeup relies on projecting dominance, strength, and untouchable power, cultivating an image of a man far too wealthy to be held accountable by ordinary institutions. Being forced to sit in a courtroom, answering questions from a judge, and accounting for financial crimes like any common defendant represents a profound public reckoning that will wound him deeply. He will not be able to control the narrative, filibuster the proceedings with lengthy speeches, or talk over the judge. Sitting in silence while his alleged crimes are methodically broadcast to the world will be profoundly destabilizing for a man so ego-driven and psychologically fragile. The broader collapse of Trump's presidency is now glaringly visible in every single direction you look. His foreign policy initiatives are failing miserably, highlighted by a disastrous Venezuela operation and a totally collapsed oil strategy. The Supreme Court recently struck down his tariffs and sharply rebuked his assertions of unlimited executive authority. A bipartisan Senate coalition successfully voted to constrain his military war powers, while his hand-picked FBI nominee alarmed even Republicans with authoritarian statements. His speaker suffered a highly viral public breakdown. Furthermore, a federal judge formally ruled that he obstructed justice, transmitting that evidence straight to Congress for impeachment proceedings. And now, atop all of that, he is being hauled into a federal court as a documented tax cheat. There is no aspect of this presidency currently functioning, no front on which he is winning. It is just a slow, grinding, accelerating collapse as the accumulated weight of years of misconduct crushes everything beneath it. Republican senators who previously broke ranks over tariffs and war powers are showing that the monolithic unity of the past is cracking extremely fast. The overwhelming tax evidence offers them a highly powerful, easy-to-explain justification to distance themselves even further, allowing them to tell their constituents that their actions are based on proven, documented criminal conduct rather than mere policy disagreements. Absolutely no senator wants to return home and explain why they voted to acquit a president who evaded taxes on $500 million of income. As the midterm elections loom on the horizon, they are shaping up to be a total referendum on everything Trump represents. Democrats are poised to blanket the airwaves with brutal campaign ads featuring the IRS raid, the offshore trust documents, and footage of the court appearances. They will directly ask voters if they want to continue being represented by people who defended a documented tax cheat. In swing districts decided by just a few thousand votes, those ads will be absolutely devastating. The Republican Party inextricably tied its fate to him years ago, and now they are being dragged down by the crushing weight of his alleged crimes. The candidates who distance themselves may survive, but the ones who cannot will be swept away. Crucially, this criminal jeopardy does not disappear when a president leaves office. It follows him for the rest of his natural life. Tax evasion prosecutions move methodically through the justice system for years, consuming vast resources, limiting freedom, and casting a permanent shadow over every future endeavor. Trump could be looking at a future defined entirely by court appearances, crushing legal fees, and the constant threat of prison. The evidence gathered will not magically disappear, the cooperating witnesses will not take back their testimony, and the seized documents will not be returned. This represents an irreversible, permanent alteration of his legal exposure that will follow him every single day. The walls are rapidly closing in from every direction simultaneously. The IRS possesses the damning documents. The federal judge has issued the binding subpoena. The impeachment articles are filed. Donor support is eroding, and his legal defenses are collapsing one by one. His tired, recycled response, screaming about deep state conspiracies and witch hunts, is entirely losing whatever power it once held because the public evidence is simply too massive, too thoroughly documented, and too undeniably public to be dismissed with mere rhetoric. The American people can read these financial documents for themselves. They can clearly see the unreported income and the offshore accounts laid out in plain language, understanding instinctively that $500 million does not vanish due to innocent bookkeeping errors. The era where Trump could escape consequences through bluster, delay, and political pressure is decisively over. The institutional guardrails designed to prevent this exact type of sprawling financial deception are finally doing exactly what they were built to do. Perhaps for the genuine first time in his exceptionally privileged life, Trump is learning that the law applies to him exactly as it applies to everyone else. No amount of money, high-priced legal teams, or furious social media posts can change that reality. The spectacular drama of the coming weeks, the forced court appearance, the impending impeachment vote, and the grueling Senate trial will serve as the final dramatic act of a presidency defined by lawlessness from its very first day. The countdown clock is ticking loudly, and this time, there is absolutely no escape. You are watching Daniel Cave. Please hit subscribe right now to help us reach 100,000 subscribers, and drop everything you are thinking about this situation in the comments below.